everybody and welcome back. I am going to be reading today Chapter 3 of the book Brightstorm, Clause 152. That afternoon, time in the library stood still. If Arthur thought hard enough, he could imagine the past 2 days had never happened, and Dad had just nipped to the larder for honey to spread on sweet bread. Mistress Poacher had escorted them back to the house. Then he had disappeared again, saying she had things to take care of. Arthur picked a book from the shelf, Exploring in Third Age, and Maudie sat in front of his iron arm. I'm going to adjust the fingers, and it needs a polish. You've been neglecting it, she said quietly. They sat in silence, Arthur not reading the words before him, and Maudie buffing his iron arm until it shone like sun on a steel pool. After a while, Arthur looked across. Maud, we've still got each other's. We've still got home. Dad had insurance. He will have made sure we're all right. But nothing seemed to be all right. Later, the front door banged and clunky footsteps could be heard along the hallway coming towards them. Maudie frowned at Arthur. Mistress Poacher opened the library door. A man stood beside her in a crisp suit, buttoned tightly at the waist, long tails, and a shirt with cuffs that Dad would have called unnecessarily flouncy. They matched the handkerchief in his pocket and the frills on his brooch-pinned necktie. He walked forward without moving his upper body, making him appear as though he was floating along. Regarding them with stone, serious eyes, he tipped his hat. Arthur and Maudie looked at each other. The man enclosed Arthur's left hand with his own hands and shook it. His hands were cold and sent shivers the length of Arthur's back. Bartimus Smithwick, he said, the muffles in his face remaining rigid as he spoke, the chill feeling stuck to Arthur's hand. Take a seat, Mr. Smithwick. I'll fetch some tea, said Mistress Poacher. The man moved to a chair at the table, then looked across at Ernst Brightstorm's chair and sat there. Maudie's lips were so tight, Arthur thought she would pop. The twin stood before the guest as he placed his briefcase on his lap, took some papers from within, then folded his hands on top. Not waiting for Mistress Poacher's return, he said, I represent the underwriters of the insurance policy your father took out for the Brightstorm expedition to South Polaris. The life insurance policy your father purchased set out that you were to receive the house, contents, and a lump sum, and I believe he instructed his solicitor that in the event of misfortunate, Mistress Poacher was to stay on and take care of you until you reached 16. Arthur let out a breath. He could handle Mistress Poacher as long as they were Brightstorm House. Except, Mr. Smithwick paused, there is one clause, 152. Arthur and Maudie exchanged a look as the insurance representative ran his finger down the pages until he reached the relevant section. Mr. Smithwick gave a small cough. If the Explorer's Code, as laid out by Longtown Geographical Society, has been broken, all insurance invalidated, and we have the right to seize all assets with immediate effect. But nothing's been decided, Maudie said. The board agreed, with a majority vote this morning, that the Brightstorm Expedition were guilty of stealing fuel from the Victorious, and so had indeed broken the Explorer's Code. Arthur's blood drained to his feet. But this can't be right. We need to speak to our father's solicitor. There is nothing anyone can do. This is your father's signature on the insurance document in black and white. But he knew he would never break the code, so he wouldn't have cared about this clause 100 and whatever, Arthur said. Clearly, that isn't the case. At the moment, they heard a brash knock on the front door. I'm sure Mistress Poacher will see to that, Mr. Smithwick said. Shortly, more footsteps trailed along the corridor. A troop of people burst into the room carrying great crates. The strangers began rifling through the contents of the library, bundling books into the crates and taking the pictures off the walls and the ornaments from the shelves. You can't do this, Arthur said. I'm afraid we can, Mr. Smithwick said. "Don't touch that," Maudie said, hugging her tall belt to her chest. "This was my mother's. You have no right." Arthur felt frozen. He was jolted into action when a man, packing a crate full of books, reached for Volcanic Islands of the North, which lay on the table. They tussled, but Arthur lost his grip on the book, and a single page ripped away in his hand. The man glared and put the book into his crate. Then another picked up Arthur's iron arm and said something to his colleague about it making a good sovereign if it was melted down. "Don't you dare," Maudie said, grabbing it. She looked as though she would clobber the next person attempting to take it. "This belongs to my brother." Watching Dad's possessions being rifled through and thrown into boxes was awful. "We'll find a way to get everything back. We've still got a home," Arthur whispered to Maudie. But Mr. Smithwick was suddenly beside him. "I'm afraid that seizing all assets includes the house. This is no longer Brightstorm property." "But we've lived here our whole lives." "Where will we go?" Maudie cried. "I believe that Mistress Poacher remains your guardian. You will go with her." All they could do was watch, utterly helpless, as their life was dismantled around them. When everyone and everything has gone, they sat alone on the bare floorboards. Arthur's whole body was numb. He looked at the page still clutched in his hand. It was the title page, featuring a captioned full-colour illustration of the Brightstorm moth, discovered on one of the volcanic islands by Dad, Ernst Brightstorm, the first ever Brightstorm explorer. It was a great moth of brilliant fiery golds and red with great feathery antennae, living against the odds in the hostile conditions of the volcanoes. Arthur folded the page, flipped open the top compartment of his iron arm and put it inside. Mistress Poacher flung the door open. "Come along, I still haven't got all day." "Where will we live?" Maudie asked. "We? Goodness, I know what it says on paper, but I can't possibly take care of you." As unhappy as Arthur felt about the prospect of Mistress Poacher looking after them for the foreseeable future, she was at least one familiar thing that they could cling on to. But Mr. Smithwick said, "You're a guardian now. I've packed you a bag each and made arrangements." They followed her to the door. Outside, a black cart waited. It was hastened to a horse, not like the newer carriages of uptown, where Pitch could drive a small engine. A couple perched on the front were dressed in black, tattered clothes making them look like a pair of great crows. Mistress Poacher shuffled Arthur and Maudie out of the door. "Luckily for you, I found 2 people willing to take you on at such short notice." "Well, now, Poacher, you said one of them was—" The woman's eyes flitted to Arthur's iron arm, which he held in his left. She turned to the man beside her. "Mr. Beggins, I don't know if we can take this unsightly thing. He'll put me off my breakfast." Mr. Beggins squinted his already beady eyes and sniffed through his long nose. It wasn't a nice, distinctive nose that suited his face. It served to make him look spiteful. "They can eat in their room, Mr. Beggins. The shipyards are looking for cheap labour to mend their skyships, if the girl is as good with tools as a poacher says. But what the boy will do in the shipyards with one arm—" She turned back to Mistress Poacher. "We'll just take the girl." Maudie hooked Arthur's arms. "He's as capable as me." Mistress Poacher hurried them towards the cart. "I can vouch for that. He's found a way around most problems, though he spends too much time with his head in books, dreaming. A dose of real Lontown will still soon, but paid to that." Mrs. Beggins stared. "We ain't Mr. and Mrs. Beggins, home for the unwanted scraps of Lontown, you know." "We're not unwanted. Our father loved us," Arthur said. The woman sniffed. "From what I've heard, he was no better than the thieves of the slums. He was just a nobody reaching above his station. I'm not going anywhere without my brother." Maudie's eyes were fierce, but filming over. Arthur tried to swallow back his own rising emotion. There was a pause. Then the man said, "Well, he might be useful around the house clearing up. Don't you think, Mrs. Beggins? Ain't you saying Beggins Hall is too much for you? One can earn, and one can cook and clean. It'll be like having our own servant." Mrs. Beggins' eyes lit up. We'll just be like these uptowners." Before they could even take in what was happening, Mistress Poacher bundled them into the cart. "Let's be going to your new home," said Mr. Beggins. Arthur sat beside Maudie, feeling as though a great unstoppable black wave was carrying them, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Out of the corner of his eye, Arthur saw Mrs. Beggins pass a small pouch to Mistress Poacher. He heard the jangle of sovereigns. He jumped up. "You sold us!" Mistress Poacher lifted her chin, a small compassionate for lost employment. At that, Mr. Beggins cracked his whip, and Arthur was thrown back in his seat. "Where are we going?" Maudie cried. Mrs. Beggins turned and gave a toothy smile that didn't have an inch of kindness in it. "To the slums, that's where." Arthur and Maudie stared at each other. The slums was the poorest district of Longtown. It was rumoured that children were always disappearing from there, sent as slaves to work in the pitch mines to the south. Turning back to look at Brightstorm House, Arthur felt a piece of him turn to stone inside. They rode through increasingly narrow streets, everything becoming darker by the moment until they were absorbed into the strange grey world of the slums of Longtown, where everything was covered in a layer of soot. Beggins Hall was on a street of uneven cobblestones. The cart made their bones rattle inside as they clattered along. The house was tall and thin, as though the buildings either side were compressing it, and it was the grimmest of them all, with smoked-out windows and dripping pipes. "Right, Mr. Beggins, you'd better get that horse back before old Cleghorn notices we took it, and I'll think about dinner." Arthur realised how terribly hungry he felt, and the idea of a warm meal was at least something cheerful. They followed Mr. Beggins inside. Beggins Hall was as gloomy on the inside as out, with tattered curtains and ripped wallpaper hanging off the walls. The hallway had bare floorboards and felt colder than outside. "I'll show you to your room." The twins followed her up the 3 flights of narrow, crooked stairs to a tiny door at the top of the house. Mr. Beggins opened the door and a chill escaped. Glimpses of grey sky could be seen through several holes in the roof. There were 2 mattresses and 1 dirty window. "Here we are. I don't want to hear a peep out of you two. We maintain a calm and peaceful home." Shouting and cursing ensued on the streets outside. A baby was screaming in a house nearby. "What time is dinner, Mrs. Beggins?" Maudie asked. "Best you get making it soon. Mr. Beggins isn't his kind of self when he's hungry." "Us?" "Of course. You need to earn your keep. There's a scraggle neck for stewing, which old Ratchet had going spare." She shut the door. "Well, a scraggle neck sounds yummy," Arthur said. Maudie looked at him, and we didn't think things could get any worse. I hope you enjoyed chapter 3, and I look forward to reading you another chapter soon.